flu, smallpox, measles, plague. The subject with the highest death rate in human history is commonly known as a virus. What a fascinating personality the voice managed to get. And then about who this person decided to become a virus, the rest depended on this person. The next moment, an artisanal rat was discovered. Attachment to the cell membrane. Intrusion into the host through the nostrils. At that moment, the thing that created the voice dropped to the ground and touched the rat. And then the invasion of the cellular cells and fusion with the membrane begins. The shell was successfully dropped. The invasion of the cell nucleus has been carried out. Creation of an RNA compound. The RNA sequence has been successfully copied. The preparation for the cure was completed. At that moment, the rat lying on the ground was spinning from the fact that the infection had successfully entered its body. And it was possible to have control over the body. Looking at the bushes in front of him, the voice thought that he had a headache and tried to figure out why he was outside. His field of vision was also a little out of order, there was a puddle of water in front of him. And then, looking at himself in this puddle, the voice realized that it was a rat. But then he realized that it wasn't really a rat, but it was himself, not understanding why he looked like that. If the hero remembered correctly, he was in the office. The next moment, something passed by him. The rat, hiding, did not understand what it was. After all, he had never seen a plant attack birds, let alone a bird with 3 legs. The next moment, he couldn't believe that he was in a completely different world. Then he remembered that he was working at his pharmaceutical company, as usual after everyone returned home, he just borrowed the lab for a while. The young man was working with his research and his memories stopped there. In other words, he must have died after making some mistake. Then our hero suddenly opened his eyes. Seeing an empty white space in front of him and a goddess spinning something like a roulette wheel. The girl said that in the next life our hero will become a virus because that's what she said, the young man recalled. And, in other words, he has now taken control of this body himself by infecting the rat. It's absurd for a scientist like him to believe in goddesses, given his current predicament. He must have been reincarnated, however, to think that he was the owner of a lab rat and that it was karma. He was thinking that he needed to understand what he could do and what he was capable of while he was in such a body. Then a friend, smelling the smell, saw red particles, and the young man realized that he had seen the virus inside his body. Looking at these particles, he realized that each of them was a part of him. Thinking that if he can take control of the rat's eyes, then maybe he can use something else. The next moment, exhaling, the young man focused, and he successfully changed his field of view to the virus. Looking at the blood vessels, he thought that it looked like red blood cells. He thought it would be bad if he was found by white blood cells, he could get out of here. Then he saw the cell membrane and thought about using it. Then a friend saw what looked like a tumor that was popping out of the cage. The next moment, a bunch of his parts were born from the cells, and the young man thought that it was a pretty disgusting sight. Swimming up to one of them, our hero asked if this cell was also talking. But he thought about the fact that it seems only he had his own will. The young man could not understand why only he had a mind, because he was supposed to command, probably, this huge army of viruses. And I thought about how they would react to orders. The next moment, he was shouting that they all had to follow him. Frightened by his own voice, he thought that somehow many of them had come together, they could be controlled from a certain distance, our hero thought, walking ahead of everyone. But still, having consciousness, the collective action of the virus in modern common sense, is not applicable here. Understanding the limits of this ability seems quite difficult, even for a scientist like himself. Then a friend heard that some voice was determining the skills that the young man possessed, and he discovered that he had the skills and powers of infection. The skill of domination and reproduction was also discovered. After hearing all this, our hero could not understand what kind of message he had heard. The power of infection, reproduction and dominance were probably his abilities after infecting the rat. It multiplied inside the body and was able to control the host's body. In this case, it should prevail over the host with high vitality. In addition to this, the complete infestation of the bush rat recorded skills, as well as cowardice and perception of danger, on its RNA. The hero thought about the fact that probably, cowardice is the perception of danger. These were the skills of this rat. It was recorded on RNA, which means that he could copy the skills of this rat by infecting it quite strongly. And it turns out that the more living creatures the hero infects, the larger his set. Riding along the road, our hero laughed, thinking that if it was true, then everything was getting very exciting. After all, he had never seen an organism develop so quickly in the modern world. Depending on how you use this ability, you can even become a sinister living being in the story. He had to confirm it immediately. The next moment, he hovered next to the flower, thinking that maybe his abilities also affect plants. After trying, he dropped his particles on the plant. The computer reported that the skill of relieving heat and also relieving pain had been obtained. Our hero joyfully realized that it worked on plants as well. Relieving heat and relieving pain, these are skills and quite convenient, but then suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by the wind, which began to make noise. And the next moment our hero looked forward and saw a secondary infection on another plant. Thinking about what abilities he might get next time, the young man wondered. Looking into the plants, he realized that the message about gaining skills had not surfaced. Perhaps his infectious ability is too weak to acquire skills through secondary infections. He had to investigate this in more detail. At this moment, looking into the plant that had teeth, it tried to eat it, and our hero jumped back in time. This scared him very much because our hero was still in a weak rat, but it is not unlikely that there is unimaginable potential behind it. After all, it is obvious that smallpox spread on Earth as a human disease about 10,000 years ago, but in this world he will spread it himself. The guy who worked for therapeutic agents against viruses eventually became a virus. This is probably just what he needed anyway. He was bored in his previous life. If he continues to increase his viral abilities in this world, he will be able to become the source of a new pandemic and ensure complete domination. It was still unknown if there were people in this world at all. At that moment, he was informed that the danger perception skill had been activated. Our hero shuddered and then saw the drops, realizing that a chill ran down his back. At that moment, he saw the threat that loomed over him. It was a wolf. Flashing his eyes, he looked at the rat, and it slowly turned away, thinking that it was very bad. After all, if he didn't run away quickly, then he was in trouble. The cowardice skill was also activated at this moment. Our hero thought that this simply could not be. It was not the time to activate this skill. After all, in a place like this, his life would end like a virus. At that moment, the wolf ate our hero, who was a rat. The god that was watching him thought that the young man who chose the virus was not. Perhaps he was chosen to become a virus. At this moment, she was carefully looking at the ball, which reflected the muzzle of the wolf that had recently eaten our hero. Looking at our hero, many discussed him, and leaving work they saw that the young man. Many people knew that our hero had said something about researching a new type of virus, and of course people understood that it was probably not completely safe. The young man was considered rather clumsy and uncommunicative, and that it was better not to mess with him, of course. At that moment, these were memories from his past world. He was finally reborn, so he asked not to force him to remember the past, and then thought about what he was doing in the new world at all. And then he remembered that he had been eaten by this wolf along with his carrier rat. Even if he was reborn into an amazing virus, would his life end right here? The young man wondered while he was inside the wolf. Thinking about what if he were to be reborn as a human again, only to go to the same humiliating job and end up like this. Thinking that he would not die so easily. The next moment, the wolf regurgitated after eating the rat. And our hero screamed from the mouth of the wolf and reported that he forced him to do it. At that moment, the infection power skill and all its virus clones that were eaten by the wolf were activated. It was an order to spread through the wolf's body, through the blood vessels. They will take it upon themselves. Also use wolf cells to multiply their number. The breeding skill was activated. Giving orders, the young man understood that the wolf would not be able to stop them. At that moment, the wolf felt that something was wrong with him. He began to shake. Our hero thought that the wolf was completely infected, and the time had come and the dominance skill was activated. The skill dexterity, endurance and ferocity has been acquired. Our hero was thinking that the messages seemed to come from outside, plus the review was now bigger than before. Then he thought about the stench from his mouth and couldn't figure out if it was from him. But still, in the end, he enjoyed the taste, which means he successfully captured the wolf. Our hero was very happy and wagged his tail, thinking that his last resort would really succeed. However, it was a grand discovery. Even if its host dies, if it manages to infect another organism, it will survive. Thinking that it could only be called eternal youth and longevity, it would not be an exaggeration. Running forward, the young man thought that it was just amazing and that he had to find other organisms and immediately infect them. As he ran, he thought that it was nevertheless very difficult to meet other living beings. And then the young man realized that there were actually a lot of living creatures around, but none of them dared to approach him. Does this mean that this wolf was actually at a high level? After all, he felt full of energy compared to when he was a rat. But it's still boring to be a creature from his past world, with some changes in appearance. Looking at the goblins in the forest, our hero thought that he would prefer to be someone else's more unique, for example, some kind of fantasy creature. For example, like dragons or goblins, would suit him. At that moment, he just noticed them, the goblins, who were fighting at the bottom of the cliff on which our hero was standing. Looking at them carefully, the young man wondered about himself. Was this really happening to him in reality, looking at the goblins? He thought about how comparatively small they were, just like fantasy novels. The young man wondered if this world was connected with the idea of the fantasy worlds of his previous life. As he went down to the goblins, the young man thought about whatever this new species was, which no one would ever see in his past world. He's going to capture those goblins anyway. Then he stopped abruptly, thinking that only this could not happen again, because the guys were too persistent and the voice was speaking. Our hero, hearing this voice, decided to stop in front of the goblins. Then I saw that there was a girl standing there, and she shouted to them that even though she was a beginner, she was still an adventurer. She couldn't be defeated here. At that moment, she was standing with her sword, ready to fight against the goblins. And our hero, looking at her, realized that he had finally seen a man. To the next moment, one of the goblins rushed at the girl and defending with a sword, she was able to deflect his blow. At that moment, she was breathing very heavily. Our hero realized that the goblins had started attacking her. But judging by her appearance, she is not from modern society. Not only does she have worn out equipment, but she's also exhausted. On the other hand, the goblins were still very energetic. The young man thought to himself that this was an ideal situation for him. Flashing his gaze, he carefully looked at what was happening ahead. After all, now that he had confirmed the existence of humans, a human body was needed for his future research. First, you had to get goblin skills. Then, without wasting time, it was not necessary to take possession of the person. Until they and their clones did this, it was also necessary to try a combination of rat skill, agility and wolf skill, ferocity. Having done this, it turned out to be a wolf with the abilities of a rat. Turning to his clones, our hero suggested that they immediately try it. He is cold-blooded and felt light, perhaps this is the effect of ferocity. At that moment, while he was running, the goblins began to attack the girl again, and she couldn't defend herself any worse. With tears in her eyes, she put out her sword. But at that moment, our hero, being a wolf, was able to defeat one of the goblins by biting him. The short temper skill was acquired. The goblin was lying on the ground trying to breathe, but it was impossible. At that moment, the girl couldn't believe that there was a big gray wolf in front of her. The wolf was thinking that it tasted just awful. The goblin, realizing that one of them was already dead, began to attack the wolf. But the wolf did not feel tired and was able to fight the goblin that was right in front of him because he was not at all like the 30-year-old scientist he was in the last world. A new night vision skill was obtained. And at that moment, everyone was suddenly looking at our hero. The girl even fell, thinking that it was not just a gray wolf. The goblin had already run away from him in horror and even threw away his weapon. At that moment, our hero began to spread the virus, thinking that it would be troublesome if he approached a person during a chase. Maybe he could just infect him and take away his abilities. The skill agility was obtained and it sounded very universal, the young man thought after hearing about this skill. But now he decided to turn to the girl. He looked at her intently as he walked towards her. The girl, seeing that the wolf was coming in her direction, asked not to approach her, being scared and holding her face in her hands. But our hero only smelled it. And surprised, the girl did not understand why the wolf did not want to eat her. The young man understood that even if the girl was exhausted and not so injured, he could use her body. But he stopped and thought about it. At this moment, the girl was looking very attentively at the wolf, who was behaving very strangely. Our hero thought that now he knew almost nothing about this world. What if their medical knowledge had advanced? Then the infection of this girl can lead to its detection and destruction. But he was thinking that he shouldn't have taken hasty action until he knew more about this world. But the human body is perfect for gathering information. The girl, seeing that the wolf had turned away and was thinking about something, asked if he was going to eat her. Howling a little, the young man asked her to wait a bit because he was thinking about it right now. Then the girl, seeing that the wolf was not dangerous, rushed into his arms, asking if by chance he was not sleeping with her now from dangers and thanked him. At that moment, the wolf jumped away from the girl because he did not expect this at all, like the girl, asking about what happened to the baby. She asked him not to be afraid to come right up to her, opening his arms to the wolf. Our hero, trembling, thought about what was wrong with this careless, stupid creature. After all, it was some kind of strange and unexpected reaction for him. It was all thanks to Wolf-san. The girl thought she could dodge after reading a book about fencing. She thought she would be fine. She didn't think it would be so hard in a real fight. Then another goblin came and attacked her. Do experts really take such circumstances into account at all? Because the most amazing thing is their achievement. The girl was talking to the wolf. They were really good because he had to train every day because he was surviving in a dangerous place. The girl was sitting opposite our hero, who was a wolf, and chatting with him. The same one said nothing and studied the girl carefully. Then she went on to explain that she really likes to eat delicious food. It was difficult for her to find a similar one in the forest, but the fact is that the food they ate tastes bad and that it differs from people's food preferences. Our hero, watching her closely and trying to figure out how long the girl plans to talk exactly like this, so here are the animals. He thought to himself that he could not understand if all the people of this world were the same as this girl. At this moment, the wolf yawned because our hero thought that he could hear important information about this world, but all she does is talk nonsense. Looking at the girl, our hero thought. Note that the wolf yawns and the girl apologized to him. And in the end, she talked too much. Then she decided that it was necessary to start with her. Introducing herself, the girl explained that she was the adventurer Elena and smiled at the wolf. Bowing to him, she thanked the animal for saving her earlier. When he heard about the adventurer, our hero thought that she had finally said something useful. And from the knowledge of his previous life, the young man could say that adventurers receive rewards by defeating monsters, collecting medicinal herbs and so on. It was a very dangerous job. Why would a young girl do such a job alone? Our hero wondered. The girl explained that she became an adventurer 2 weeks ago, but it seems she has no talent for it, she said. And even the goblins, who occupy the lowest rank among the monsters, were too strong for her. They did not resist her attacks. They are probably one of the weakest. If so, then this little girl was very weak, the hero thought, looking at the girl. The girl went on to explain that everyone in the Adventurers Guild ignored her, so she ended up becoming a loner, sadly explaining to the wolf. Our hero thought that if a girl wanted to become stronger, you can try to strengthen her with viral abilities. It will be an interesting experiment. At that moment, the girl stretched out her hand to our hero, so grabbing his muzzle the next moment and lifting it, the girl kissed him on the nose. Addressing Wolf Sama, saying that he was her first partner. It's been a long time since she talked to anyone. She couldn't stop talking and was too excited. Feeling the girl's kiss on him, the wolf fell, thinking that it was too close. The same one, looking at the wolf, could not understand what was happening to him. Our hero reflected that it was very close, and in the previous world he would certainly have been prosecuted. We imagined an article that read about a 30-year-old reborn man, self-proclaimed. He thought it would be good, since this world was different. After all, in fact, this man's brain was a flower garden. Looking at the girl, the young man thought while she wailed that it was very bad and apologized to the wolf. And since it gets dangerous after sunset, she had to get back to the city as soon as possible. At that moment, our hero came closer to her, and the girl was surprised and reported that she was very reluctant to leave, but she had to go home. Our hero went along with her thinking that he is still holding this girl, and the priority is to know where she lives. Seeing that the wolf went with her, the girl smiled. She asked if he was really seeing her off, because he was very nice and was such a gentleman. The wolf was walking along the path with the girl. She explained that before becoming an adventurer, she worked in the field in her village. Since it was a small village, everyone had lived as a family for as long as she could remember. But her village was destroyed by goblins, but everyone escaped safely, so everything was fine. The wolf listened attentively to the girl, who continued to say that since the village was in ruins and could not withstand another raid, they had to move to a new land. That's why she cried earlier. But the next moment, gathering her strength, the girl explained that she would not give up on becoming an adventurer. She will become strong enough to protect everyone in her village. Rubbing her fists and proudly reported that even if she looked weak, she worked a lot in the field where strength was needed. The wolf listened to her and did not know what to answer her because he could not answer in general. He began to think about his past life in his mind. Our hero reflected that he also strongly wanted to invent a cure for people in his former world. But he got so carried away with it that people started treating him like an oddball. Therefore, our hero began to hate people. Remembering all this, the young man was a little upset. Even though this girl was also an outcast, she continued to move forward. The next moment, while the girl was moving through the forest, she pointed ahead, explaining to the wolf that they had finally come. Smiling, she explained that this was where she lived. The next moment, a city appeared in front of our hero, along with towers towering above it, and it was the city of Faust. Upon seeing the city, the young man was very surprised, or rather not the young man himself, but the wolf in the body he was in. The girl at that moment, scratching her head, asked the wolf if this city seemed big to her, but she still did not remember the way back she spoke there. Looking at the city, the young man realized that it was much bigger than he expected. After all, he had never seen such devices in his life that were in the city. Therefore, he reflected that, as he had previously thought, it would be foolhardy to simply infect people. The girl sadly, addressing the wolf-san, explained that no matter how much she wanted to invite him to the hotel as a thank you, she could not do it. The wolf understood that a monster entering the city would cause trouble, so he tried to show his paws so that the girl could not worry about it. And she just walked, and he would go his own way. The girl, waving to our hero, said goodbye to the wolf-san, saying that she would never forget his kindness. After all, she was sure that someday they would meet again. Looking at the happy girl, our hero just barked, and she started waving at him. Looking at the road along which she was walking away, the girl of our hero was visited by sadness, so she left. He thought that he had not talked to anyone for a long time. Well, if she plans to become an adventurer, perhaps they will meet again. Turning around and leaving, our hero thought. At that moment, he wondered if he himself could have become an adventurer. After all, they get the opportunity to travel the world and meet a variety of creatures. It was a great opportunity to improve their skills and get even more of them. Looking at the wolf's body, he thought that this body was his biggest problem. After all, he needed an indispensable and healthy body. He could not infect Lena and impersonate her because she talked too much. Anyone who knows her will definitely notice something is wrong. Then our hero thought about the fact that he could infect an unidentified corpse. But he absolutely did not want to even think about it because he did not even know if the corpses could move. As he walked to his seat, he wondered who else he could have infected. At that moment, he again saw a crowd of goblins standing at the bottom of the cliff on which our hero was moving. He thought that although he would get new skills, his main priority was to acquire a human body. At the same time, meeting people in the forest was still a quest, but then he thought about people and humanoid monsters. Looking at the goblins in front of him, the young man thought that he just needed to capture a goblin, put on a mask or hood, and impersonate a human. To then enter the city thinking that he could try it. Looking at the goblins that our hero noticed, there were 5, if not surrounded, then everything can go to waste. Then suddenly, looking at these very goblins, the young man saw that one goblin had already been infected, and he realized that it was the one who escaped, whom he infected when he saved Lena. Since his clones had penetrated his body, he decided to do something else. Therefore, the first thing that came to our hero's mind was that he had to immediately own the body of this goblin. But then I thought about how to get him under control. After all, he was able to capture the wolf being one with the mouse. So I wondered if he should have deliberately let them eat him. But he wouldn't really want to go through that again. Of course, there was nothing to be done, but if you think about it, when he first arrived here, he was able to change his view of the virus by focusing enough. After all, every virus is a part of him, and in this case, can he move his consciousness to a virus that infects another organism? Therefore, he decided to focus on the goblin that stood in front of him and on his clones inside that goblin. Using a trick, he was able to penetrate the goblin's body. Already looking through his eyes, the young man understood that he had succeeded. Looking at the goblins, he wondered if everything had gone well, because at that moment his companions were looking at him with a rather strange look. When he was a virus, he didn't think much about it, but looking at the goblins from the angle he was looking at now, it seemed to our hero that they looked quite creepy. Then suddenly the goblin turned to him. The young man shuddered, thinking that he had really done something wrong. Approaching Dublin, another goblin informed him to give him the bag. Looking at the goblin that came up to him, our hero in horror gave him the bag and thanked his brother only for taking it away. Although these were just basic words, he could understand their language. That's because he's probably got his brain under control. At that moment, the other goblins reported that the wolf had attacked him. It was terrible, and the goblin girl, approaching our hero, handed him grass, explaining that it calms the mind, so he could eat it. Taking the grass from the girl, our hero began to chew it. Standing next to him, she asked him to take his time. At that moment, the young man allowed the thought that the goblins were very kind. Then, looking at the wolf, the young man thought that it reminded him of what happened to this animal. And looking at him, once again the young man realized that the wolf looked confused. After he let go, his original consciousness would probably come back to him. The wolf turned around and looked closely at the goblin and then began to growl so that the goblin was scared. The next moment, he warned everyone that there was a wolf and that they needed to run away faster, but it was too late because the wolf rushed straight towards them. While they were trying to escape, our hero thought that it would be very difficult for them to run with such legs. In that case, he decided that it was necessary to activate the endurance skill and combine it with agility. The next moment, when our hero tried to catch him and bite him, the young man was able to jump away and escape from his opponent. Jumping high on a cliff, all the goblins thought that they had probably been saved. After all, the wolf was barking from below this rock, unhappy that he could not catch his prey. The goblins eventually escaped from the wolf. Everyone was very happy, and our hero thought that they were so simple because it was all thanks to him. However, the significance of the fact that its symptoms can manifest in other infected creatures is a huge step forward. This can be applied in many situations to follow the gang in order to adapt to it. It was also quite interesting, and the young man thought about it. And he thought to himself that his companions should have worshipped his endurance. At that moment, one of the goblins shouted that he was still full of stamina and energy, so they could keep moving towards the house. Here our heroes came to the cave. One of them reported that they had returned and were greeted by an elder. Our hero noticed that they used caves as nests, however, their situation was deplorable. Most of them do not finish eating, wearing only a loincloth. Turning to the boss, everyone said that it was a very small prey, that he would probably get angry. The next moment, after hearing about the boss, the young man was trying to figure out who it was. Then a giant goblin appeared in front of them and, addressing Goblin Sama, they explained that they had returned. To which the disgruntled boss said that his subordinates were late. Looking at the boss, our hero thought that he looked like a creepy goblin the size of a man. Is this the one they call the hobgoblin? Looking at what they had brought, the boss was trying to figure out if it was all the loot. The goblins explained that this was all they could find because the orcs were stealing goblin loot and there was nothing left. The boss reported that then his subordinates had to go attack human villages. Looking at the boss, our hero thought that really he couldn't do it himself. After all, the goblins explained that humans were very strong and they couldn't win. Our hero was thinking at that moment that with such a body, there would be no problems with entering the city. The green skin can be hidden under clothes. It is obvious that he has more vitality than goblins. At that moment, the Goblin King hit one of them on the head, asking if the goblin had thought about why he was still alive. And tapping on his head with his foot, he explained that the goblin in front of him was a useless rabble and that he was hungry. Our hero could not stand it and turning to the goblin, he talked about finding food himself. After hearing this, the boss did not expect anyone to go against him. Upon hearing that the goblin was unhappy, our hero thought that his opponent had taken the bait. Therefore, he decided to explain to him that the goblin asked to go, but he was lazy, saying that he was like a spoiled child and that he was good for nothing. At that moment, the young man thought that he would infect him with his breath full of viruses. But then the system explained that resistance to the virus was detected and only a short period of time was available for infection. After hearing that the main goblin had virus resistance, our hero was clearly not ready for this. After all, no one had told him anything about it. At this moment, the goblin, reaching out to our hero, grabbed him by the head, asking if he really had the courage to go against him. Grabbing the goblin, lifting it up, the boss reported that this place would not last long because of the orcs. Our hero, kicking in his arms, thought that no one could have known that the time required for infection differs depending on the purpose. Our hero prayed that the infection would happen faster because he understood that at that second he could say goodbye to his life. The next moment, there was a crunch, and the boss announced that this goblin was no longer needed and that he would leave this place. At this moment, the process of reproduction began inside the host's body. The boss reported that all the other goblins here would be eaten by orcs. At that moment, the capture of the hobgoblin was successfully carried out. Our hero reported that he would devour the goblin before that. After releasing our hero, who was still in the little goblin recently, the hobgoblin began to behave strangely and everyone was watching it closely. And then exhaling, he smiled at everyone in such a way that everyone was shocked by his behavior. Goblin explained that he had thought so until today, but he changed his mind because they were all friends and offered to get along. At that moment, he was informed to get the brute force and sharp claws skill, as well as the endurance skill. Our hero was just happy to hear this, because all these skills looked useful in battle, and he did not expect anything less from the leader of the pack. Then suddenly someone interrupted his thoughts with cries of alarm. One of the goblins reported that there were orcs outside, pointing to the exit and looking ahead, everyone saw the giant orcs that stood in front of the entrance. The orcs, smiling, reported that this land was theirs and suggested that the goblin get out of here. Our hero, looking at the orcs who were right in front of him, thought that the difference in strength was too great. Our hero thought to himself that it wasn't that he didn't understand the hobgoblins' feelings, but before they captured him under normal conditions, they would have left those guys behind. Of course, if he didn't have the infecting ability. Looking at so many living organisms in front of him, not only could the young man increase his skills and control, it was also an ideal training for all his various abilities. He also thought about himself that it would be awkward and difficult, then he could always escape with the help of dexterity. Looking at the goblins who were standing behind him, our hero realized that these goblins were very scared and that they were just useless. And he thought about the fact that he needed to play the role of an inspiring leader because they had to get excited after his inspiring speech. Our hero began spreading his viruses on them, as well as saying parting words to cheer up his army. The goblin was telling everyone else to listen to him carefully, telling them all that they were strong and asked them to support him with their strength so that they would not be cowards and had to defend their home with all their might. After talking for a while, the young man thought that his words should have clearly reached the goblins. After that, he activated stamina, agility, brute strength and agility. And it looks like his infection can activate all useful skills at the same time. He thought that these skills would be enough for now. At that moment, the crackling started and the goblins began to grow. And the next moment, giant goblins appeared in front of our hero. Looking at these changes, the young man realized that they were more than impressive. More than he imagined, thinking that maybe this was the effect of the force, he was now sure that they would suspect something. The goblins shouted that they had become strong from the hobgoblin's support, even the body had become large, they had amazing sensations at the same time. Our hero, listening to them, thought that thank God they were simpletons. And turning around, he thought that it was necessary to start a large-scale experiment first. After his rebirth, the goblins stood against the orcs, who were trying to figure out what was already happening. After all, this body-strengthening magic must have been there. But the goblins just couldn't change like that, but the orc's second partner said he doubted he wouldn't be smart enough to do it. Our hero thought that now they were equal not only in numbers, but also in physical strength, along with the bodies that stood against them. New symptoms have been discovered: stealth, evasion, fatigue, exhaustion and infirmity. Our hero, thinking that so many symptoms would come after he infected the goblins with it. In the next moment, more new symptoms were discovered: hunger, anemia, resourcefulness, excellent strategist, insight. The symptoms continued to add up. Next, a short temper was discovered, which mutated, a symptom of night vision, which also mutated. Agility, and it also meant that getting duplicates would probably increase the symptoms, our hero thought. By infecting all the orcs, he will be able to get even more symptoms. In this case, it turns out that he was probably invincible. The Goblin King, standing in front of the orcs, asked about what happened to their determination, because a moment ago, they were so strong. Thinking that, probably, these pigs that were right in front of him and lost their grip. Upon hearing what the Goblin King was talking about, the orcs ran forward at him, calling him vile. Even if these goblins of his began to look different, they were still just goblins, reporting that they were not their equal. The orc pounced on the Goblin King, who in turn swung his sword over his head. The next moment Org was defeated, the goblins despite this thought that Hobgoblin-sama was better than usual. Then they realized that the orc in front of him was already knocked out. The orcs, looking at their kinsman, understood that he was killed, and the goblin was able to deal with him very quickly. Our hero wasn't worried about whether he would be able to handle the sword properly, but thanks to his agility, he would handle it pretty well. Also, instead of being afraid, he began to get excited from this battle. When they saw that the goblin had killed their kinsman, the orcs rushed forward at him, saying that this was simply unacceptable, but the next moment our hero dealt with these orcs. The symptoms were discovered: perseverance, a strengthened arm, natural regeneration, willpower, will suppression, and insanity. Listening to what the system was telling him, our friend thought that he had many wonderful symptoms. After all, orcs were, more high-class monsters than goblins, but nevertheless orcs could not be compared to them after the young man used his buffs at all. Symptoms were also discovered: physical, manipulation, recovery, fatigue and hardening. The orcs, addressing each other, were very angry because they could not cope with the goblins that were fighting against them. The next moment, one of the orcs asked to bring him the one they had caught yesterday, addressing his subordinate who was standing next to him, being shocked by the request. The subordinate shouted to the orc that they had just caught him recently and that he was still untrained. As a result, he could attack them, but the leader of the orcs shouted for his subordinate to just do it. He was very angry because it just couldn't be that an orc could lose to a goblin. The goblins fought the orcs, and new symptoms, fatigue and anemia, were received. Given that they have already been infected, they may also develop negative symptoms. Our hero thought that they had given them an even greater advantage, so he thanked the orcs to himself. However, being able to play with other creatures in this way makes him a kind of weakling, but this is a divine punishment for his greed. It would be rude to continue a fight he had already won, so he just decided to fight and end it. Then suddenly they saw a creature that was accompanied along with the rumble. Looking ahead, our hero tried to figure out what it was, not a cloud, but there was thunder. Suddenly there was a crackling sound. When this creature came up to them, they realized that it was moving through the forest. At this moment, a huge beast was making its way through the dense trees, which was held on a large chain by the orcs. There was a huge bear in front of our hero, and the young man realized that this rumble was coming directly from him. The goblins screamed because it was a thunder bear. After hearing its name, it became clear to our hero that this monster probably uses the forces of electric current. Addressing the thunder bear, the orc reported that he would attack the guys he was pointing at. Speaking of which, they were delicious, but I had to eat them all. At that moment, the thunder bear looked closely at the orc to be next to him and struck right at him. It was clear that this bear was not trained at all, thinking about what the hell it was that they saw. The power of lightning, and there was only one coal left of the orc. They hated the very essence to lose to them. The orcs were proud, the young man thought. At this moment, while he was standing on the battlefield, thinking about the situation, his companions, addressing the hobgoblin, reported that the thunder bear was the strongest here and that they needed to escape. When he heard that they had to run, our hero thought that they would not do this for anything in the world and he would never lose. Besides, this electricity looks like an interesting ability and he definitely wanted to get it. He won't run away from such a treasure. The bear may look strong, but after it infects it, a completely different story begins. Technology, as in the case of the hobgoblin. Our hero knew that the infection would take some time to take effect. Turning to his partner, our hero asked him to lend him his spear. After scratching his hand, the young man thought that it would be dangerous to get too close, so he would just smear the measles with fresh blood and then attack the thunder bear with the spear. Raising the spear and throwing it towards the bear, our hero wanted to injure him. But then the bear, seeing that the spear was flying straight at him and could hit him in the eye, closed his eyes, after which the spear simply broke. Looking at this, our hero was surprised, thinking about how durable this fur was. At that moment, the symptoms were revealed. Resistance to electricity, sharp claws, protection from blades. Our hero has acquired several symptoms. Maybe the spear did not belittle this monster, but blood certainly got into his eyes. In this case, he will direct his consciousness into his body. But then he realized that he couldn't do it. He can't sense enough viruses inside the bear to transfer. Thinking about why he couldn't do anything, was it really because of the electricity he was generating? After all, any virus that approaches it dies. The next moment, looking at the angry bear, which was already glowing with its strength, our hero realized that his opponent was approaching.